In 1944, high above the burning jungles of the Pacific, Japanese pilots were being hunted by something they couldn't see. The killer wasn't a ruthless warrior, it was a quiet farm boy from Wisconsin. His name was Richard Bong. By war's end, he had 40 aerial victories, a record never broken. This is the story of how he became America's deadliest ace. High above the steaming jungles of the Pacific in 1944, a lone American fighter prowled the sky. Below, Japanese pilots clawed for altitude engines, screaming as they rushed to intercept incoming bombers. They never saw him coming. No warning, no second chance. Just a sudden flash of gunfire from above, and another aircraft fell burning into the green abyss. The man hunting them wasn't loud. He wasn't reckless. He didn't chase glory. His name was Richard Bong, and he looked nothing like a legend. A quiet farm boy from Wisconsin, soft-spoken, almost shy, Bong seemed out of place in a war that rewarded bravado and aggression. Yet by the end of World War II, he would become the deadliest fighter pilot America had ever produced. 40 confirmed aerial victories, a record that still stands. While the world descended into chaos, Europe crushed beneath the Nazi war machine and the Japanese Empire expanding across the Pacific, America was still waking up to the reality of total war. Bong didn't enlist out of hatred or revenge. He joined because he loved to fly. From the moment his hands touched the controls, instructors knew they were witnessing something rare. Bong didn't just pilot an aircraft, he merged with it. The airplane responded to him like a living extension of his own body. But raw talent came with a dangerous edge. Bong pushed limits. He tested boundaries, his own and the machine's. Stationed in California, he treated the sky like a proving ground, flying with a confidence that bordered on recklessness. To many officers, he looked like another hotshot waiting to crash and burn. What they didn't understand, what would soon terrify an entire enemy air force, was that beneath the calm exterior was a predator's mind. Patient, calculating, lethal. Bong wasn't learning how to fly anymore. He was learning how to hunt. Richard Bong's talent almost destroyed him before the war ever had the chance. Stationed at Hamilton Field in California, the young second lieutenant was introduced to the most advanced fighter in the American arsenal, the P-38 Lightning. Twin-engined, fast and brutally powerful, it was unlike anything else in the sky. Bong didn't just admire it, he fell in love with it. And that love turned dangerous. Official reports spoke politely of unauthorized aerobatics, but the truth was far more alarming. Bong flew his P-38 low over San Francisco, so low pedestrians could see the rivets in its wings. He looped the Golden Gate Bridge in a breathtaking violation of every regulation in the book. To most commanders, this was clear-cut recklessness, grounds for permanent grounding, maybe worse. Another talented pilot about to be wasted by his own ego. Then Bong was summoned before George Kenney, commander of the 5th Air Force. Kenney had no patience for show-offs. He had an air war to win. Bong expected his career to end that day. Instead, Kenney did something extraordinary. As the reprimand thundered down, Kenney studied the young pilot's eyes. He didn't see arrogance. He saw certainty, total confidence. Bong wasn't guessing what the aircraft could do, he knew. Where others tested limits blindly, Bong explored them with instinctive precision. Kenney recognized what others had missed. This wasn't a hotshot. This was a prodigy. Rather than break him, Kenney decided to shape him. Bong was kept under direct supervision, trained harder than ever, and prepared for the only place his abilities truly belonged, the front lines of the Pacific. By September 1942, he was sent to New Guinea, a brutal aerial battlefield where American pilots were being chewed up by battle-hardened Japanese veterans flying the legendary Zero. On paper, Bong shouldn't have survived his first month. The Japanese pilots had been fighting since 1937. They were masters of the turning dogfight. The Zero could outmaneuver almost anything the Allies had. Many American pilots died trying to fight it on its terms. But Richard Bong didn't play their game. As his P-38 climbed into the tropical sky, engines roaring, Bong wasn't thinking about glory. He was thinking about physics, speed, altitude, angles. Somewhere between the clouds and the sun, the quiet farm boy from Wisconsin was about to rewrite the rules of aerial combat and turn himself into something the enemy would come to fear. The ghost was ready to hunt. Richard Bong did not survive his first combat missions by luck. He survived by refusing to fight the war the way everyone else did. Over the skies of Buna and New Guinea, Bong watched the Japanese Zero fighters dance. They turned tightly rolled effortlessly and baited American pilots into slow horizontal dogfights where the Zero was king. Many young Allied flyers took the bait and died within seconds. Bong watched it happen. He studied it, and he reached a cold conclusion: turning with a Zero was suicide. So he never did. Flying the P-38 Lightning, Bong invented his own way of war. Where others fought emotionally, he fought mathematically. His doctrine was brutally simple and terrifyingly effective. First, altitude. Bong always climbed higher than his enemy, stacking potential energy like money in the bank. Second, speed. He converted that altitude into a screaming high-speed dive. Third, firepower. The P-38's nose-mounted guns unleashed a concentrated blast of lead and high explosives straight ahead, no convergence, no guesswork. One short burst was enough. Then came the final rule: disengage, never turn, never linger. Climb back into the sky and reset the fight. It was hit-and-run warfare at 400 miles per hour. Bong's combat reports were dull, almost boring. Altitude, time, result. What they didn't capture was the precision behind them. While other pilots sprayed ammunition in desperate hope, Bong fired only when the shot was perfect. Intelligence officers studying his gun camera footage later noticed something chilling. His firing windows were incredibly short, sometimes less than a second. But in that second, aircraft simply ceased to exist. His secret weapon was deflection shooting, the art of firing, not where the enemy is, but where he will be. Most pilots struggled with it for years. For Bong, it was instinct. His childhood as a hunter had trained his eye to lead a moving target, to wait to strike once and never miss. The results were immediate. 1 kill, then 2 in a single mission. A bomber shredded here, a Zero torn apart there. Bong became a phantom presence in the sky, appearing from above, striking with surgical violence, then vanishing into the sun. Japanese pilots began reporting the same terrifying pattern: sudden, high-speed attacks by a twin-tailed fighter they could not catch, could not turn with, and could not escape. They gave it a name: the fork-tailed devil, and Richard Bong was its master. By early 1943, the quiet farm boy from Wisconsin was already an ace. By the end of the year, he was something else entirely, a living weapon refining a method of aerial combat that would change the Pacific Air War forever. By mid-1943, Richard Bong was no longer just a lone predator stalking the skies. He was becoming something far more dangerous, a leader who could shape an entire air battle before the enemy ever realized they were trapped. Above the jungles and coastlines of New Guinea, Bong's reputation was spreading fast. His kill count climbed steadily, but what truly set him apart was not the numbers, it was control. While other pilots chased targets in chaotic dogfights, Bong saw the sky as a chessboard. Altitude, formation, timing. Every move mattered. In July 1943, over the port of Leh, the test came. A massive Japanese strike force surged toward Allied positions. Bombers packed tight, Zero fighters swarming around them like guard dogs. On the ground, American troops watched the sky darken, bracing for destruction. To them, it looked unstoppable. But far above, hidden in the blinding sun, Bong and his P-38s were waiting. Instead of diving immediately, Bong held his formation high, forcing the Japanese pilots to crane their necks upward into the glare. He waited calm, patient, watching for the exact moment the enemy committed to their bombing run. That hesitation was deadly. Bombers exposing their bellies, fighters breaking formation. Then Bong gave the order. The P-38s fell like silver blades. Bong led the attack straight through the heart of the formation, ignoring the agile Zero escorts and targeting the bombers themselves. One short burst. A Japanese bomber disintegrated in fire and smoke. Bong didn't look back. He was already climbing, resetting the fight, searching for the next opening. His squadron followed his example perfectly. Hit, climb, disappear. Again and again. The Japanese formation collapsed into chaos. Pilots unable to track the faster American fighters that refused to stay and die honorably. The results were devastating. Multiple enemy aircraft destroyed, minimal Allied losses. Japanese combat reports from that period spoke of American pilots who attacked with terrifying speed and disciplined fighters who could not be countered by skill or bravery alone. By late 1943, Richard Bong had reached 21 confirmed victories. He was no longer just an ace. He was a symbol. General George Kenney understood the power of symbols in war. Bong was decorated, celebrated, and then, against his will, sent home to the United States. America needed heroes, and Bong had become one. Crowds cheered. Newspapers printed his face. The quiet farm boy from Wisconsin was transformed into a national icon. But inside, Bong was miserable. He hated the speeches, the handshakes, the feeling that he was safe while others were still fighting and dying. In letters to Marge, he confessed the truth. His heart was still in the Pacific, in the cockpit, protecting bombers and brothers in arms. And he would not stop asking to go back. The war wasn't finished with Richard Bong yet. In March 1944, Richard Bong finally got what he had been begging for. He was going back to war. When he arrived in New Guinea, the battlefield had changed, and so had his aircraft. Waiting for him on the runway was the upgraded P-38J, lightning faster, tougher, and deadlier than anything he had flown before. Improved engines, better high-altitude performance, hydraulically boosted ailerons that gave the aircraft real control at extreme speeds. In Bong's hands, it wasn't a fighter anymore. It was a scalpel. The enemy had changed too. Years of brutal attrition had hollowed out Japan's air forces. Many of the seasoned veterans Bong once faced were gone, replaced by young pilots with minimal training and little combat experience. Against an American ace with hundreds of combat hours, the imbalance was terrifying. Bong saw it immediately and adapted without mercy. His tactics evolved again. Bong perfected the head-on attack, one of the most dangerous maneuvers in aerial combat. Two aircraft closing at over 800 miles per hour. A firing window measured in fractions of a second. Most pilots flinched. Bong didn't. He held his course, eyes locked forward, firing until the last possible instant. Gun camera footage later showed him flying directly through clouds of debris from aircraft he had just destroyed. The victories came fast. By June 1944, Bong shot down his 27th and 28th enemy aircraft in a single mission. With those kills, he surpassed the legendary World War I ace Eddie Rickenbacker. The record that had stood for more than 25 years was broken. Richard Bong was now officially America's greatest living fighter ace. The reaction from high command was immediate and fearful. General George Kenney was proud but deeply concerned. Bong wasn't just a pilot anymore. He was a national symbol. Losing him would be a catastrophic blow to morale. Orders came down restricting his flights. No routine missions, no unnecessary risk. Bong was furious. He argued that his place was in the sky, leading his men, not sitting safely on the ground while others faced the danger. A compromise was reached. Bong could fly, but only on high-priority missions and only as a flight leader. He wasn't just a shooter anymore. He was a commander in the air, directing the battle itself. The restrictions didn't slow him down. If anything, they pushed him deeper into the fire. By October 1944, over Balikpapan, Borneo, Bong led a critical escort mission protecting B-24 bombers attacking Japanese oil refineries. The enemy threw everything they had into the sky. The air exploded into chaos. During the fight, Bong's P-38 was hit. Cannon shells tore into his right engine, setting it ablaze. Warning lights flashed. Most pilots would have disengaged immediately. Bong didn't. Flying on one engine trailing smoke, he turned back into the fight and shot down another enemy aircraft before finally limping home across hundreds of miles of open ocean. His plane was nearly destroyed. Any other pilot would have written it off. Bong repaired it, flew it again. By December 1944, the war had finally caught up with Richard Bong, not in the sky, but on paper. With 40 confirmed aerial victories, orders came down from the very top. Bong was grounded permanently. Not because he lacked skill, not because he lacked courage, but because he had become too valuable to lose. America's ace of aces was ordered home whether he liked it or not. His final combat patrol passed without incident. No enemies, no gunfire, just empty sky. And with that quiet flight, the most lethal combat career in American air combat history came to an unceremonious end. Back in the United States, Bong was greeted not as a pilot, but as a symbol. He was awarded the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest decoration for valor. In the Pentagon, senior leaders spoke of gallantry, intrepidity, and leadership above and beyond the call of duty. Bong stood silently, visibly uncomfortable. He had never flown for medals. He had flown to protect bombers, to cover troops on the ground, to bring his wingmen home alive. That humility defined him. To the public, he was a living legend. To himself, he was simply a man who had done his job as precisely as possible. In private letters, Bong rarely mentioned kills or glory. He wrote about responsibility, about discipline, about focus. He believed aerial combat was not a duel of bravado, but a cold science of angles, energy, and timing. His success was later dissected by Army Air Force's analysts. The findings were staggering. Bong's hit percentage bullets fired versus aircraft destroyed was astronomically higher than average. He wasted nothing. Every burst was deliberate. Every attack calculated. His combat doctrine became required study: maintain energy advantage, strike from position, fire briefly, disengage immediately, discipline over aggression, precision over passion. In February 1945, for the first time in years, Richard Bong found peace. He married his sweetheart Marge in Wisconsin. For a moment, the war faded. The ace was no longer a hunter in the sky, just a young husband hoping for a quiet future. But Bong's legacy was already sealed. Modern air combat would never allow another Richard Bong. Radar missiles and beyond visual range warfare ended the age of close-in dogfighting. His record stands not just because of skill, but because the world he mastered no longer exists. Today, a restored P-38 bearing the name Marge stands as a silent tribute. 40 victories, 200 missions, one unbreakable record. Not because Richard Bong was reckless, but because he was calm, calculated, and utterly precise. A farm boy who turned the sky into a battlefield and rewrote history while doing it. The war was over for Richard Bong, or so everyone hoped. America's greatest fighter ace had survived 200 combat missions, outflown swarms of enemy aircraft, and walked away from a sky that killed lesser men without mercy. But Bong was not built to live on the ground. The cockpit was the only place he ever truly felt at home. So the Army gave him a new mission. Aviation was changing fast. Propellers, the tools Bong had mastered better than anyone alive, were becoming relics. At Lockheed's secretive Skunk Works in Burbank, engineers were building something revolutionary. America's first operational jet fighter, the P-80 Shooting Star, faster than anything before it, unforgiving, untamed. The future of air combat. They needed pioneers. Richard Bong became one of them. As a test pilot, Bong returned to being a student again. The P-80 was nothing like the P-38. No propellers, no engine noise, just a screaming turbine. It landed at terrifying speeds and offered no second chances. Every flight pushed the limits of technology no one fully understood yet. Every takeoff was an experiment. Bong respected the jet. He studied it obsessively, logged data, reported problems, helped engineers write the rulebook for an entirely new era of flight. Once again, he was on the edge of history, this time without an enemy in his gun sight. Then came August 6th, 1945. It was a clear summer morning in California. Bong climbed into a brand new P-80 for a routine acceptance flight. Engines spooled, clearance given. The jet accelerated down the runway and lifted cleanly into the sky. Moments later, disaster struck. A primary fuel pump failed. The engine flamed out. At low altitude, with no power, the sleek jet became a falling brick. Bong fought instinctively, restart procedures, control inputs, desperate calculations. But there was no time, no height, no escape. For the man who had survived everything the Pacific threw at him, this was the one fight he could not win. He attempted to bail out, but the ground was already rushing up. The P-80 slammed into a field and exploded. Richard Ira Bong was killed instantly. He was 24 years old. On that same day, half a world away, an American B-29 dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The world entered a new age of warfare. Bong's death. America's greatest air hero was buried beneath headlines announcing the dawn of the nuclear era. The irony was brutal. The master of close-range aerial combat died on the very day his kind of war became obsolete. 80 years later, his record still stands. 40 victories, never broken, never likely to be, not because no one was good enough, but because there will never again be a sky like the one Richard Bong ruled. When the smoke of World War II finally cleared, the skies grew quiet. The jungles of New Guinea reclaimed their silence. The air routes once filled with contrails and burning wreckage became empty again. But one number refused to fade. 40 confirmed aerial victories, 200 combat missions. One name etched permanently into the history of air warfare: Richard Bong. In the decades that followed, aviation advanced at a breathtaking pace. Radar replaced eyesight. Missiles replaced guns. Dogfights turned into blips on screens and launches beyond visual range. The world that produced fighter aces vanished almost overnight, and with it, the possibility of anyone ever matching Bong's record. But numbers alone were never his true legacy. Bong's real impact lived in doctrine, in discipline, in lives saved rather than enemies destroyed. His methods, maintaining energy advantage, attacking from position, firing with restraint, disengaging without ego, became the foundation of American fighter tactics long after the war ended. He taught pilots that survival and success came not from aggression, but from control. General George Kenney, the man who once nearly grounded him for reckless flying, later wrote that Bong was the finest fighter pilot he had ever seen, not because he was fearless, but because he was calm, because he made killing look effortless by stripping it of emotion and reducing it to repeatable principles. Bomber crews remembered him not as a legend, but as a guardian. Ground troops remembered looking up and knowing someone deadly competent was watching over them. To those he protected, Bong wasn't an ace, he was insurance. Today at the Richard Bong Veterans Historical Center in Wisconsin, his Medal of Honor rests quietly behind glass. Nearby stands a restored P-38 Lightning, the name Marge still painted on its nose. It is no longer a weapon. It doesn't roar or climb or hunt. It simply stands. A reminder of a time when a soft-spoken farm boy could climb into a cockpit, master the most dangerous machine of his era, and bend the course of a war through patience, precision, and discipline. The battlefields are silent now. The skies are empty. But the record remains untouched, unchallenged, and almost certainly unbreakable. Not because Richard Bong was lucky, not because he was reckless, but because he understood something timeless in war. The deadliest weapon is not fury, it is control. And that is why his legend still flies. In the end, Richard Bong did not conquer the sky with rage or bravado. He conquered it with silence. While history often celebrates war as chaos, screaming engines spinning dogfights, desperate last stands, Bong proved something far more unsettling: that the most lethal man in the air could also be the calmest. That victory did not belong to the loudest or the boldest, but to the pilot who understood restraint. Bong never chased enemies for sport. He didn't duel for honor. He didn't gamble with luck. Every fight followed the same cold logic advantage: first strike once, disengage cleanly. To him, aerial combat was not romantic, it was responsibility. Bomber crews depended on him. Ground troops trusted the sound of engines overhead. His job was not to die heroically. His job was to win and come home. That mindset is why Richard Bong remains unmatched. Modern pilots will never fight the war he fought. They will never close to within a few hundred feet of an enemy aircraft judge deflection by instinct or fire cannon shells while staring another pilot in the eyes. The era that allowed such mastery is gone, and with it, the possibility of another ace like Bong. But his legacy is not frozen in the past. Every modern fighter doctrine that prioritizes energy management, positional advantage, and disciplined disengagement carries his fingerprints. Every pilot taught to avoid ego-driven combat is echoing a lesson Bong learned in blood and altitude over the Pacific. He showed that survival itself could be a form of victory, and that killing efficiently was often the most humane option available in war. What makes Bong's story endure is not the number 40. It is the paradox behind it. The deadliest American fighter pilot in history was not driven by hate. The most successful ace was not addicted to danger. The man who ruled the sky preferred quiet letters to applause. He was a farm boy who hunted deer before he hunted aircraft. A pilot who trusted physics more than instinct. A warrior who believed discipline saved lives. Today, the skies where he fought are empty. The jungle airfields are gone. The contrails have faded. But somewhere between altitude and sunlight, the lesson remains. War rewards fury briefly. It rewards courage sometimes. But it belongs in the end to those who master control. And no one ever mastered it better than Richard Bong. History has a way of being loud about the wrong things. It remembers explosions, speeches, and final victories. But the story of Richard Bong endures for a different reason. It is remembered because it was built on discipline, not drama, on mastery, not myth. Bong did not win the war alone. He never claimed to. What he did was far more enduring. He showed what happens when talent is fused with restraint, when aggression is replaced by calculation, and when ego is left on the ground before takeoff. In a war defined by excess, of violence, of loss, of sacrifice, Bong stood apart by doing less better. 40 victories was not an accident. It was the result of hundreds of small decisions made correctly under pressure. When to climb, when to wait, when not to fire, when to disengage. He understood that survival was not weakness, and that coming home alive was not cowardice. It was success. That philosophy quietly reshaped American air combat. Long after the guns fell silent, Bong's approach lived on in training manuals, tactics, rooms, and cockpit briefings. Energy management, positional dominance, fire discipline. These weren't slogans, they were lessons written in altitude and speed over the Pacific. Today, visitors stand before his Medal of Honor in Wisconsin or look up at the restored P-38 named Marge and see a relic of another era. But Bong's story is not about nostalgia. It is about permanence, about principles that outlast technology. Jets replaced propellers, missiles replaced guns, screens replaced eyesight. But no machine has ever replaced judgment. No sensor has ever replaced patience. And no weapon has ever replaced control. Richard Bong died young, but his legend did not freeze in time. It matured. It became instruction. It became warning. It became proof that the most dangerous man in the sky does not need to shout his name. The skies he ruled are empty now. The battles are over, but the standard remains: 40 victories, 0 ego, absolute control. Some legends fade with the war that created them. This one never will. When the engines finally fell quiet and the war slipped into history, one truth remained unchanged. No one ever flew the Pacific the way Richard Bong did. The skies he once ruled are empty now. No contrails, no climbing fighters, no desperate calls over the radio. The kind of war that forged Bong no longer exists, and neither does the world that allowed a single man in a single cockpit to shape battles with judgment alone. That is why his record still stands. Not because modern pilots lack courage, not because technology failed to advance, but because air combat itself evolved away from the intimate, merciless arena where Bong thrived. Missiles replaced marksmanship, sensors replaced eyesight, distance replaced decision-making in the blink of an eye. Yet even in this new age, Bong's shadow remains. Every time a pilot chooses patience over pursuit, every time altitude is traded for speed at exactly the right moment, every time discipline overrides ego, that is Bong. He proved that domination did not require recklessness, that survival was not weakness, that the most dangerous man in the sky could also be the calmest. His genius was not in daring fate, but in denying it opportunities. Bong never sought immortality. He never chased headlines. He simply mastered his craft so completely that history had no choice but to remember him. 40 victories did not make him legendary. How he achieved them did. And as long as war demands judgment, restraint, and control, the quiet farm boy from Wisconsin will never truly leave the sky. Some pilots land, legends don't. Strip away the headlines, the numbers, the legend, and what remains is a formula. Not magic, not luck. A system built on clarity and control. Richard Bong didn't dominate the sky because he was fearless. He dominated it because he was disciplined. Post-war analysts studied his gun camera footage frame by frame. The verdict was undeniable. Bong's hit rate was extraordinary. He fired less hit more and survived longer. His edge came from a ruthless adherence to principles: energy over emotion, position over pursuit, precision over panic. He fought vertically, not horizontally. He dictated terms, then exited cleanly. Again and again. The airplane mattered. The moment mattered. But above all, the mindset mattered. Bong understood that control of speed, angle, timing, and self was the true weapon. It's why his methods became doctrine. It's why countless pilots lived who otherwise might not have. His legacy wasn't the enemy planes destroyed. It was the lives preserved by a smarter way to fight. Today, the runways are quiet. The skies he once hunted are empty. In Wisconsin, his Medal of Honor rests behind glass. A restored P-38 named Marge stands motionless, no longer a predator, now a reminder. And the reminder is simple. Greatness doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through preparation, patience, and restraint. Bong never tried to be a hero. He tried to be effective. History did the rest. Modern war has moved on. Screens replaced sight. Missiles replaced guns. The era that forged aces like Bong is gone forever. But the lesson he left behind is timeless. Fury fades. Technology changes. Control endures. 40 victories. 200 missions. One standard that time could not erase. The farm boy who mastered the sky didn't just win battles, he redefined how wars are fought. And that is why his legend still flies.